The night of June 5, 1944, was defined by an unbearable silence, broken only by the churning of thousands of propellers slicing through the cold, dark water of the English Channel. A vast armada carrying 160,000 men was heading toward Normandy, and the air in those landing craft was thick with the acidic smell of seasickness and a profound shared dread. These men were not the hardened veterans of North Africa or Italy. Many were young, raw recruits, their eyes wide with the chilling understanding that they were about to become the point of history's sharpest spear. They had been briefed on the operation, codenamed Overlord, but no briefing could prepare them for the psychological torment of the final hours. Lieutenant John F. Collins, shivering in a cramped Higgins boat bound for Omaha Beach, captured this paralyzing anticipation when he wrote, "The thing that got you wasn't the thought of dying. It was the absolute certainty that you were going to die, and you just had to sit there and wait for the precise minute it happened." The soldiers clung to anything that offered comfort. A wet cigarette, a worn photograph, or the monotonous rocking of the boat. They knew the Germans were dug in, waiting behind concrete fortifications and heavy guns. Every mile traveled reduced the possibility of survival by an exponential factor. As the sky began to bleed gray light onto the waves, the sheer scale of the invasion, battleships, destroyers, cruisers stretching to the horizon, should have been reassuring. Instead, it magnified the isolation of each man. Sergeant Ray Munger looked out at the massive fleet and felt a devastating loneliness, simply stating, "It was too big to be real." It felt like a funeral procession for the world. As dawn broke and the massive naval guns began their deafening preparatory bombardment, the silence was shattered, replaced by an impossible, roaring cacophony. That sound, the sound of history's greatest gamble beginning, meant there was no turning back. The ramp was about to drop, and these men were about to see exactly what Hitler's men had waiting for them. Before we plunge into the red chaos of the landing itself, make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our channel. Tell us in the comments what you know about the landings at Omaha Beach. The moment the LCT's landing craft tank hit the initial layer of German defenses in the churning surf, every meticulously detailed plan disintegrated. Operation Overlord had predicated success on the naval and air bombardment neutralizing the coastal strongpoints. But at Omaha Beach, known to the Allied planners as Bloody Omaha, the bombs missed, the shells fell short, and the Germans of the 352nd Infantry Division, a unit the Allies didn't even know was there, were waiting. The boats carrying the 116th Infantry Regiment, the first wave, began taking fire 500 yards out. It was a perfectly calibrated storm of steel designed to shred the unprotected decks. Corporal William J. Cross described the approach in one single terrible word: geometry. The German interlocking machine gun fire traced precise, deadly patterns across the water, meaning that every space on the ramp was covered. When the ramps dropped, the shock was total. Instead of the relatively secure landing the intelligence had promised, the soldiers plunged into a maelstrom of confusion and immediate carnage. Many men, overloaded with heavy equipment, sank instantly into the tidal flow and drowned before they could even draw their rifles. The water quickly turned crimson. The engineers, tasked with clearing the steel hedgehogs and teller mines, were vaporized almost instantly. Captain Philip H. Randolph, watching his company melt away before reaching dry land, delivered a quote that summarized the collapse of military order. The first 5 minutes proved the war was not fought by manuals. It was fought by terrified animals. The immediate destruction of officers and NCOs meant that the chain of command vanished in the foam. The men were left stranded in chest-deep water, pinned down by a relentless, undiminished torrent of machine gun fire, forced to make a terrible calculation. Endure the fire in the water, or risk the dash to the sand where the fire was even more intense. This wasn't a landing. It was a massacre, but the most devastating moment of the morning was still to come, when they realized the beach itself offered no sanctuary at all. The moment they reached the exposed, narrow strip of sand, less than 150 yards wide in many places, the fighting ceased being a tactical problem and became a psychological failure. The men, soaking wet, shivering, and deafened by the constant barrage of German artillery and mortar fire, found that the supposed cover provided by the shingle bank was entirely insufficient. They were pinned. Soldiers dropped behind anything. A helmet, a dead comrade, a discarded canteen, praying for the wave of lead to stop. The noise was so overwhelming that verbal commands were impossible, reducing the fighting to isolated groups of terrified men. The initial momentum was broken, and the entire invasion was paralyzed. It was in this moment of absolute stalemate that the true, harrowing reality of the combat set in. Private First Class Felix Brannigan was lying face down in the sand for nearly an hour, unable to move, while mortars exploded around him. When asked what he was thinking, his response was a raw admission of utter emotional depletion. "I wasn't thinking about America, or freedom, or Hitler. I was just begging God to let me live for 5 more minutes. And when the 5 minutes passed, I started begging again." This was the soldier's emotional reversal. The shift from the anticipation of death to the paralyzing embrace of despair. The sand, heavy and clinging, became the symbol of their failure. Every movement drew fire, and every second prone eroded their will to fight. Omaha was not a battle for ground. It was a battle for the human spirit. The only alternative to surrender was impossible courage, but how do you rally men who believe, absolutely, that the next step means vaporization? The breakthrough required an act of leadership so defiant, so contrary to all instinct, that it had to shock the paralyzed soldiers back into motion. The tide, which had been the allied friend by bringing them to the beach, suddenly became their enemy. As the water receded, it revealed more deadly obstacles and trapped the wounded. More critically, it signaled that the window for tactical movement was closing. The men realized that staying prone on the beach meant death. The only way to survive was to push forward, up the bluffs, and into the German bunkers. This transition from fatalistic paralysis to desperate action was driven by individual, explosive acts of pure will, often by junior officers and enlisted men who miraculously survived the first waves. Colonel George A. Taylor, one of the highest-ranking officers still standing, understood the impossible stakes and delivered the necessary punchline to his exhausted men. Standing fully exposed, ignoring the machine gun tracers snapping around him, Taylor bellowed a quote that would define the entire morning. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead, and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell off of here." This brutal, plain-spoken refusal of defeat shattered the paralysis. Engineers, supported by small pockets of infantry, began the desperate, suicidal work of blowing gaps in the barbed wire. The strategy shifted from a planned frontal assault to a chaotic, uncoordinated climb. Men used ropes, scaled treacherous paths, and exploited tiny, overlooked ravines. They were moving forward not out of bravery, but because the alternative was certain obliteration. The moment of no return came when Sergeant Major Max Nutter and a handful of soldiers from the 29th Division scrambled up the 100-foot bluffs and discovered, to their shock, that the German trenches were not continuously manned. A breach had been created not by tactical brilliance, but by raw, stubborn desperation. The cost of this single, precious breach, however, was incalculable, and the survivors were immediately confronted by the devastating evidence of their morning's trial. By late afternoon, the American forces had secured fragile toeholds atop the bluffs, finally pushing inland and beginning the long, grinding fight through the French countryside. The immediate terror of the beach, the sheer, deafening noise and the impossible fire, was gone, replaced by the chilling quiet of the immediate aftermath. As the soldiers looked back over the expanse of Omaha, the full, crushing cost of the victory became starkly evident. The beach was a slaughterhouse, littered with the wreckage of equipment and the bodies of thousands of men, many of whom never fired a shot. Private First Class Donald G. Burgett, sitting exhausted on the bluff, looked down at the chaos he had just survived and delivered the ultimate, reflective summary of the morning. He quietly observed, "You felt like you earned the right to look at that beach. You didn't just pass through it. You were remade by it." The landing at Normandy was not just a military operation. It was a psychological furnace that instantly aged every survivor. They understood, in a way no civilian or general could, the absolute gulf between the clean lines drawn on a map and the visceral reality of combat. The immediate consequence of their sacrifice was the liberation of Europe, But the long-term consequence was the trauma carried home by every man who lived. They had fulfilled the greatest task asked of them, but they were forever marked by the words and the sights of that terrible, beautiful morning. The harrowing experiences of these soldiers, from the dread on the channel to the grim determination on the bluff, remain the most profound lesson in the price of freedom. What do you think was the single bravest act committed on the beaches that day? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If you found this account compelling and want to explore more high-stakes moments in history, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. These voices need to be remembered.